Hi, everybody. So this week we're going to be examining feminism and feminist ethics. And I think that you're going to find this is a very intriguing topic. So there are three historical waves of feminism and feminist ethics. And we'll also talk about care ethics and relational theory. So as an opening question, I'm going to ask you, what do we mean by ethics? Traditionally, who has historically shaped our understanding of it? As you've seen throughout our lectures, most of them, if not all, have been about male ethics and different men throughout the ages that have devised different ethical systems and ideas. So now we have the chance to dive into the differences between the way men think and the way women think, and to ask ourselves the question, do they think differently? Do they come to ethical decisions differently? And how might traditional male-centered ethics exclude or marginalize women's experiences? So in the lecture, we're going to trace the development of feminist ethics across all three waves of feminism. We'll introduce some key concepts of the ethics of care and relational theory, and we'll explore how feminist ethics challenges dominant moral paradigms. So let's give some historical context. First wave feminism happened in the late 19th to the early 20th century. It focused primarily on legal and political equality, especially women's suffrage. So some of those key figures were Mary Wollstonecraft, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and John Stuart Mill. On the subjugation of women, he advocated equality. Some of the ethical themes during this time were an emphasis on universal human rights, including women, and rational individualism. And these were framed in terms of liberalism and seeking inclusion in the public rational sphere. So women traditionally had been left out of the public rational sphere. They didn't have the right to vote. They didn't have the right to own property, to own land. And so this first wave is all about some of those ideas. So some critiques about first wave feminist ethics are that it focused largely on white middle-class women. So that's something to think about as we go through the lecture. And it did not challenge the underlying masculine ideals of autonomy and objectivity in ethics. Now, our second wave of feminist ethics takes place between the 1960s and the 1980s. That's right, during the civil rights era, the anti-war movements, and our sexual revolution. So the key goals during second wave feminism were towards equal opportunities in work and education, equal opportunities, thoughts of reproductive rights, and challenging patriarchy in public and private spheres. So some of the key thinkers here were Simone de Beauvoir, who wrote The Second Sex. One is born, or I should say one is not born but becomes a woman. Betty Friedan was another key thinker who wrote The Feminine Mystique, which was a critique of our domestic roles. And then Catherine McKinnon and Andrea Dworkin, who spoke on gender, power, and sexual politics. Some ethical developments that took place during this wave, it was the beginning of feminist critiques of traditional moral theories like Kantianism, utilitarianism. It questioned abstract universality and gender-neutral ethics, and there was an emergence of what we call care ethics as an alternative. So let's talk about care ethics and what that is. So the ethics of care developed in response to Lawrence Kohlberg's stages of moral development, which you may have come across if you've taken a psychology class. Carol Gilligan, in A Different Voice, which was published in 1982, argues that women's moral reasoning often focuses on care, relationships, and responsibilities, and reject ethics that are more male-centric, like justice, rights, and rules. So the ethics of care emphasizes contextual decision-making, right? Decision-making that happens within a context. It emphasizes empathy and responsiveness, our responsibility towards others, and the moral significance of relationships. Think back to our previous lecture on Confucianism and how important relationships were in that lecture, and see if you can draw some parallels for yourself. Some of our key concepts then in care ethics are partiality over impartiality, responsiveness over detachment, and connection over autonomy. So you can see this is a much more relational theory based in a situation, a context where people are interacting with one another in a way that creates this dynamical whole. There have been some critiques of the ethics of care. So one of the risks is that it essentializes women's moral voice as inherently nurturing and romanticizes care while neglecting the structural burdens of caregiving. So let's take a look at relational theory. Relational theory builds on the ethics of care by integrating socio-political context into the understanding of moral agency. So the core tenets then would be that human beings are fundamentally relational. They are formed and sustained through social bonds. Moral autonomy is not in isolation, but an interdependence on one another. And relational theory highlights the power dynamics that are present in relationships. Some key thinkers of these ideas were Virginia Held, Nell Noddings, and Jennifer Nadleski. So how can we apply some of these ideas? We can apply them in family dynamics, in healthcare ethics, in restorative justice, and in public policy. So it challenges this whole idea of a public versus a private divide, treating domestic labor, child rearing, and emotional work as ethically significant. And this leads us then into our third wave feminism, which took place from the 1990s to the early 2010s. So it emerged in response to perceived limitations of second wave feminism. It emphasizes the idea of intersectionality, inclusion of race, class, sexuality, disability, and global perspectives. So you can see it's broadening in context here and including more ideas and connections to these ideas. And it also celebrates individual identity and diversity. So the ethical contribution during this third wave was it critiques the universal woman of the second wave feminism. And it accounts for a plurality of experiences, cultural variation, and power relationships. The key thinkers were Bell Hooks, Chandra Talpad Mohanty, and Judith Butler, if you wanted to look up some more information on any of the third wave principles. So in conclusion then, feminist ethics is not a single theory, but a critical practice of rethinking who counts, what matters, and how we live in relationship. It offers a powerful lens to question power, voice, and responsibility in both our public and our private life. And it emphasizes a pluralistic world that invites dialogue, empathy, and social justice. So some key reflection questions for you for your journal this week. Question number 1. How do the ethics of care and relational theory challenge traditional moral philosophy? Number 2. Can we develop a feminist ethics that avoids essentialism while still recognizing gendered experiences? And number 3, how might intersectionality shape ethical responsibilities and judgments? So I might guess that some of you may not have heard of intersectionality or essentialism or recognize those words. So I encourage you to do a little research and dive in to what they are so that you can understand what they mean and how they relate to you personally. I'm looking forward to discussing feminist ethics with you, and I hope you have enjoyed this short overview of some of the main ideas that we'll be discussing this week.